Good afternoon, everybody. Eden Grow Creedmoor Fury here, coming to you from the vineyard and my happy place. And I'm down here today trying to get some last-minute chores done, some things that I probably should have done a while ago, but for lack of a better excuse, I think it's mostly because I was probably too lazy when I had an opportunity, maybe even fatigued from after doing something else. Nothing really is of greater value than what I'm going to share with you today if you're a grape grower. From my perspective, it's the perspective of a person who's growing muscadines. We're growing some red muscadines, and gosh, I'm hoping some white muscadines. I planted these from seed many years ago, and I did so with a gentleman who believe was a little bit of a prankster, and several months into the process I found other plants growing where they all should have been just grapevines. But anyway, be that as it may, we moved over and said, hey, whatever we got here that's a grape, we're going to go ahead and continue to grow. And in no time, we were able to plant them in the ground. This was last year. We planted them essentially just before the last freeze. We had a nasty freeze, and I lost a plant or two. Or I stressed a plant or two and lost one. And since then, we've recovered fully. So the vineyard is really officially in operation only 1 year now, and I've come into the vineyard today to get the last of the pruning done. Typically this is something we like to do when it's really cold, because the grapes do tend to bleed a bit, especially if they're an older variety or one that's a little bit more established. They have more access to water and nutrients in the soil, so they tend to bleed a little bit more. Also because we don't really cut that much off of the new growth stuff, the 1-year-old, 2-year-old, or 3-year-old stock. We kind of encourage it to grow and find its way up towards the top line, at least up towards the bottom line. And you'll notice I haven't even installed the bottom line yet. That's something that we're in the process of doing. It doesn't matter because my plants, they're really not that tall yet. I think the tallest one is like the number 1 or number 2 plant over there on the other side, and it's about 3 or 4 feet tall. So it's not quite high enough to reach the 5-foot top line. And right now we're basically just training them. Those of you who are new to growing grapes, you're going to learn a whole lot about training your grapes, especially if you follow Creedmoor. But anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and try and get myself in better position to show you all some good video clips of what I'm going for in pruning a young grape plant. These particular grape plants, they're not quite vines yet, but they are, I want to say they're about 3 years old right now, maybe just over 3 years old. It did take a considerable amount of time to germinate them from seed, so I don't want to let anyone get the wrong impression. Grapes, especially from a variety that was not necessarily meant to be reseeded. My grapes are from a nursery in Georgia, and they came from another vineyard that's local to me, that I managed to maintain some years ago, and I simply took some of the seeds from some of the harvests that we made, and I grew them into plants. So my vineyard now has 20 plants growing within it that are from that effort. So here we go. Let's get to it. Okay, so here's an example of one that I just pruned, and if I get it really close, you can see the water coming out of the 2 pruning cuts right there. So one of the reasons why I prune them very lightly when they're young is because I don't want them losing an enormous amount of hydration as a result of the cuts. All of this stuff is going to get a compost tea that I make down over there from the pond. It's going to get a compost tea applied to it. That compost tea has a specific bacteria in it that I've been culturing for quite some time that is known for creating biofilms. Okay, so the point here is that I'm going to apply the compost tea to these grapes after they've been pruned. You can see the moisture drips right there and right there, just sort of shining, twinkling in the sunlight. I'm going to apply that to these, all the cuts, all the way, and around the base as well. It's a fairly active growing zone here. I mean, wow, we're on the move. This particular zone has been here for a couple of years. We actually laid the chips the year before we planted. So, you know, this is what's going on now. We're working on the soil food web. Let me take you somewhere else and show you one that hasn't been pruned yet. Okay, so here's an example of one that hasn't been pruned. It's growing kind of wildly. I do not put the little miniature greenhouses around them. It's just not necessary. You build the ecosystem as well as grow the plant. Some things just aren't necessary. Here you can see proof that it's just not always necessary to protect the entire plant with a greenhouse. They grow just fine. Okay, we're going to go over here and look at another one. Y'all get to see something very few people get to see. Down here is a small bioaccumulator. I mean weed. And it's got a little bit of a taproot that'll pop right out. You'll see that? That's telling Creedmoor something. Whatever it is that this particular plant accumulates, Mother Nature has decided this soil requires. Sure, we've got some growth. I've got some buds coming in on these things. They're really tiny right now. It's still a little bit early, but this is just another example. You can see they kind of grow wild, and really muscadines, they really are kind of a wild grape producer. They are out here in my woods all over the place, and those don't produce nearly as many grapes as what you're going to see come from these in the future. Reason for that is because the vines tend to grow way up high, and they don't always grow horizontally. And in order to inspire an enormity of growth, it's helpful to not force the plant to pull the water from the roots 50 or 60 feet up into the sky. While tall muscadine grapevines are not without grapes, I can promise you they don't produce as much grapes as mine do. So let's walk over and have another one. I told y'all about that number 1 or number 2 plant. Let's head down there. If you're wondering about these fence stakes, I use those fence stakes because they have little spots on them for me to tie a twist tie around and keep it in place. You can see the orientation is always to run it in a spiral fashion around it. That will be reproduced here on this 3/4 inch EMT tubing that I use. The tubing is made out of metal, and it does tend to shed a little bit of iron into the wood chips, which is not a bad thing. There's plenty of iron in the dirt below. But it's going to last a whole lot longer than something made out of wood or bamboo here, folks. Bamboo disintegrates pretty quickly. It also is a great place for things like moss to adhere to, and lichen and other things like that. They tend to get on it. I don't really have that problem with the conduit pipes when I use them in my growing systems. It's fairly inexpensive, or was up until lately, and I like to use it because it works. It's effective. You can also bend these things into hoops and protect your plants from the cold. Okay, so let's keep heading on down the line. Okay, here we have one that's just a little bit more of a specimen. It's got some dead wood on it. We want to get rid of the dead wood. It's got some extra growth that's kind of going nowhere, but there's a lot to be able to be trained on this grapevine. You know, I got a lot to work with. So because there's so much mature growth, I can show you this. If I had a low line, this would already be in a decent place for a cordon location, but I do not. And we're not going to be that low or close to the ground. This is going to get spiraled around the pole behind it, and then the white fence post will be removed completely. I'll be looking to take as much of the low growth down there out as possible. This particular plant being larger, I can remove more of the extraneous growth. What I want to land with in the end is essentially a spiral-shaped vine that comes out of the earth, goes up the pole, and then I'll have a low line where I have a cordon on the left and the right. Can't really show you that right now. Maybe I can give you an idea. The high line is here. It's about 5 feet up. The low line will be 30 inches down. There'll be a cordon on the left and the right of each wire. Each wire will have a cordon that travels 10 feet down this way and terminates just before the post. That will be maintained, and the tips of the next plant will be right here. And it will continue along until we get over to here. And here's my number 1 plant. I hope y'all can see, and hopefully I'm not breathing too heavy. I'm out here working. It's kind of cool. It's a beautiful day. But you can see how much robust growth is on this plant. It's not as tall as the other one, but it's doing really, really well. Well, I'm going to take some of that off and free it up and encourage it to send a single trunk up the tree. That's what I really want, is one single stem going up. I don't really need to, I don't want to, I don't prefer to. It does happen from time to time. And I would just want to say this from a, let me turn y'all around again. You know, kind of from a veteran grower's perspective. We always want to hedge our bets. We never want to take off more than we have to. Is my hat crooked? It's always crooked, right? We want to leave the plant with enough opportunity to stave off any future cold issues we might have. It can still be really cold here up until April. I consider April 15th to be my final frost date. So, you know, I keep all of those things in mind, and I never want to be pruning after April 15th. If April 15th hits and I didn't prune a plant or a tree or something like that, it pretty much just goes. Other people will have, you know, varying degrees of success pruning in the spring, but I got to tell you, where I am in the Piedmont of North Carolina, every bug in the world starts here, it seems. And there's also a lot of other pathogenic fungi and things like that you know, they like to take out sick plants. And if you prune in under the hot temperatures, the plant is going to be somewhat significantly more stressed. The wound's going to stay open longer. It's going to lose opportunity for respiration to bolster its functions before it really needs them when the solar intensity is at its peak. So, I mean, these are all really, really good reasons to get this stuff done, either late fall if you're somewhere where it's cold, or maybe even close to the middle of winter. Yeah, I'm behind. All right, so let's get to it.